Exodus chapter 20. We've been going through the Ten Commandments. We, from early December, diverted slightly, and now we're getting back to it. And it would be good for us to have a little review of what we've looked at so far. How many commandments have we looked at so far? Does anyone remember? 4. We've looked at 4. We've looked at 4 commandments. James, what did you say? Did you say 5? So we're looking at commandment 5 today. So I'll give you 25% on that one. But you can help us out by reminding us, hopefully, of what the first commandment is. What's the first commandment? I am the Lord your God, you shall... Yes, that's excellent. You shall have no other gods before me. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. That's fundamental and that's foundational to every other law. If you get that one wrong, you're going to get every other law wrong. So, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, Annabella, the second commandment. You had to know I was going to ask. I asked your brother first, so you had to know you were next. Don't make idols. Excellent. Do not make idols. So this walks hand in hand with the first commandment. If we have no other gods before the one true God, then we ought to know that we ought not to make idols. But this is how some people would work around that. They would say, well, we worship the one true God, but we worship him through this statue. Or we find that this device is helpful to focus our attention when we pray. Many people would actually not admit to praying to a block of wood. Most people would not admit to praying to a painting or tapestry. Most people who pray in front of such objects or do not feel as though they can pray without such objects are saying that they are praying to whatever spiritual entity that object represents. But essentially, that is going against the spirit of this law. That is why the Lord says, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Do not make for yourself any graven image. The old translation says, do not make for yourself idols. Idols can be blocks of wood, carvings of gold, silver, some other precious material. It can be ceramic, it can be plastic. There are little plastic idols that you can buy. You can have a range of idols, not only across different religions, but in our society, we have the idol of self. We have the idol of consumerism, materialism. We have idols of capitalism and communism. We have idols of identity. We have idols of money. We have idols of sports. We have idols of celebrity and status. We have an abundance of idols. In the context of this passage, the carved imagery was what was in mind. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Do not bow down to them or serve them, for the Lord your God, I the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And we saw that there were consequences, not just for the individual who's bowing down to those idols, but for their families as well. The Lord shows steadfast love to those who are faithful to him and keep his commandments. Do not bow down to any idol. In our context today, this is applicable. It's not only carved images, it's the spirit behind it, this idolatry that puts other gods in front of the one true God. What is commandment number 3? Shisola, do you know commandment number 3? Maybe Jasira does. Shall not take the name of your Lord your God in vain. Don't take God's name in vain. Don't abuse God's name. And we saw what that meant. We saw that it's not only using God's name in place of a swear word. It's not only saying, oh my, God's name. It's not only using his name in an irreverent, exclamatory way, which, however mild that may seem, is not respectful and honoring to God. It's also presenting God's name in a context where it's not appropriate. Saying that God said something that God didn't say. Saying God did not say something that God did say. Saying that you will be somewhere or do something, God willing, without actually having any intention of doing it. Or whilst knowing that the likelihood is that God is not willing. So people misuse that. It's right and appropriate to say God willing and to acknowledge that we are subject to God's will, but to abuse such statements is to misuse God's name. Do not take God's name in vain. What was the fourth commandment, rather? Very, very eager. Okay, very eager. This is a rarity. Now, I don't know why, but I have the thought that perhaps you've scouted ahead. Have you been looking ahead? Both of you have your hands raised. I'm going to take it as a yes. So maybe could you say it together? You're going to read it, aren't you? Say it again. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So we remember to honor the Lord. We remember to honor his day, not out of a spirit of legalism, but out of a spirit of love. And we saw that there is a distinction between, we did look at that. There's a recording of that if you want to listen, if you weren't here. There's a distinction between the Sabbath day and the Lord's day in the New Testament, the Sabbath day observance of the Old and the Sabbath day observance of the early believers, but then the observance of the Lord's Day, Sunday. There's a difference. There's a distinction that is quite clear scripturally. However, the gathering of God's people is important. It's crucial. We're told to not forsake gathering together, as is the habit of some. However, that gathering is not to be mistaken for observing the Sabbath, because actually, if you are saying this is the same Sabbath as was observed in the Old Testament, if you say Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, I guarantee you that most, apart from I did get a coffee this morning, but many have traveled longer than a Sabbath day's journey. There was a set journey that you could travel, and many, maybe most of us, not myself, but many in here have traveled more than the Sabbath day's journey, which was very, very minimal. Thomas cycled. That involved some exertion. Sorry for outing you about that, Thomas, but the reality is it's the spirit of the day. What is the day about? Is it about worshiping God and gathering with God's people and enjoying fellowship, directed towards honoring and worshiping our Lord? That's what this is about. But consistency is crucial, and we mustn't say this is the same as the Sabbath whilst breaking the regulations of the Sabbath. If you're going to say the law here applies to the Lord's Day, then you have to take it all into account. The general idea here, however, is for rest and submission to the Lord's design for mankind to rest, to have a Sabbath day. Again, there's a recording of that. I can pass that on. And you can do some of your own study, I hope, as well. Today we come to commandment number 5. And it's crucial that we have reviewed the first 4 commandments because those had to do with our relationship to God. Now, the first 4 commandments having to do with our relationship to God, Jasira, what do you think the next 6 commandments relate to? First 4 have to do with how we relate to God. What are the next? How we relate to Marginally to ourselves. Okay, Annabella, very keen.
Honor your father and mother.
Okay, so that's the next commandment. That's what we're looking to. And the next commandments follow on from that in some way. That's a foundational part of the next commandments. But the next commandments have to do primarily how we honor God and how we relate to other people. So everything that we're talking about in the next few weeks is a practical outworking of our relationship with God. But just as the Lord alone being worshipped is foundational to every command, our honoring of other people begins in the home. Our honoring of other people begins with how we relate to those authority figures in our life. And I hope that you'll follow along with me. There are some difficult elements to this, and there are some complexities that I think we ought to acknowledge. But the commandment remains. The commandment is there in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. As Annabella correctly stated, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Apostle Paul references this command in Ephesians chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Honor your father and your mother. First of all, let's clarify that it can be difficult to honor your parents. It can be difficult to honor your parents. Gisola, do you find it easy every time to obey your mum? Putting you on the spot. No, you don't. Jasira, do you find it easy to respect what your dad has to say sometimes? Or do you sometimes find it hard? It can be a bit hard, right? I think everyone can relate to that, but let's make it more difficult. Wally, you're gloating over the guys. What about yourself as an adult? Your mum is back in Nigeria, right? Do you find it hard to honor your mother sometimes, or is it something that you've grown in? Is it something that you find easy?
It's very difficult when I was growing up. I always wanted to be my own.
So when you're growing up, you have this attitude of independence, right? You want to be independent. You want to do your own thing. You're 6, 7 years old and you think you're an adult almost. You're 6, 7 years old and you're acting all grown up and you want to do your own thing your own way. And I've heard little kids in supermarkets look up at their mom or dad and say, "Stop treating me like a child." It's a very tough one because actually the kid is a child. Young teenagers, the same. Once you reach a certain age, you start to perhaps act a bit different or dress a bit different or think a bit differently. And you just kind of, there's a natural independence. Not all of that is bad. There's a case for growing up. You need to grow up. You shouldn't be, Jasira, you shouldn't be a mama's boy. Okay? You're not, but you shouldn't be. Okay? You have to grow up. You can't always expect, if you find something difficult in life, for your parents to fix it or to particularly make it better. You have to grow up yourself. James, you have to honor your mom. You have to honor your dad. You have to respect them. You have to obey them, even when it's difficult. But you can't always rely on them to be there. Even when they're not there, you need to make sure that you say things that you think things, that you do things that are respectful to them. Okay? It can be difficult to honor parents. Let me go a little bit deeper here, though, because we're not only children in our congregation. The people of Israel who were receiving these commandments weren't only children. There were children, but there were adults receiving these words. Why were they receiving these words? And what do we need to do as adults in honoring our parents? Can it be said that it's difficult for adults to show honor to their parents? Absolutely. There are some for whom it may very well be that this is an unpleasant message. There are some for whom it may be that this message actually is, it may not be a nice message to hear, and it may be something difficult to come to terms with. There are some who have faced abuse, horrific abuse from their parents. If you're one of those people, I'm sorry. There are some people who have suffered great mistreatment from their own blood. And if that's you, I am sorry. There are others who it's difficult because there's just a lack of understanding, and there seems to have been a consistent and persistent lack of understanding. The personality conflict, perhaps, at odds for different reasons, different ways, over a period of time. Others, they were abandoned. You may have been abandoned or know someone who's been abandoned, and that may be something that has affected you or those you know in a severe way that's been traumatic and difficult to come to terms with at different stages in your life. Others, they might think, well, I wish I was abandoned. I might as well have been, because my parents were so apathetic. They were hardly ever there. I was just left to my own devices. And that exposed me to things I shouldn't have been exposed to. And that left me in harm's way in a way I shouldn't have been left. And that caused me to discover things that I shouldn't have discovered when I did. And that's very difficult. Falling out with parents over something or another. Disagreements. It can be difficult to honor parents. To respect, to esteem highly is the gist behind this. It's not necessarily obedience for children, for those who are actually children. So among us today, it's Jasira, Jasola, James, and Annabella. For you guys, you're told, obey your parents, obey your father and your mother. Children, obey your parents. And the Lord, for this is right. So you need to be obedient to your parents. For those who have reached a stage of adulthood and independence, there's not that same requirement biblically for obedience. But there is still the same command, and it is a command to honor your father and your mother. And there's no exception, and that's what you may find quite difficult. There's no exception given here. It doesn't say honor your father and your mother unless they've really not been nice to you, or unless they've mistreated you or abused you. It just says honor your father and your mother. And that may be very difficult to come to terms with, and we should be open and honest about that. But while we acknowledge that it can be difficult, and in some cases it most certainly is difficult to honor, to esteem, to respect your parents, we are directed to honor our parents. We are directed to honor our parents. Honor your father and your mother. Ephesians 6, verse 1 through 2. Obey your parents. One thing that this shows us is that the nuclear family is a vital part of God's plan for the healthy functioning of our lives and the healthy functioning of society. The nuclear family being father, mother, and any potential offspring. Not everyone has children. Children are not what makes a marriage, but father, mother, and any potential children are the nuclear family. They're the bedrock of society. In that context, there's father and there is mother. There's male and there is female. They are married before God, before the state, and they perhaps have children, and they seek to bring those children up in the right way. So, as we saw in Ephesians, followed by the command for children to obey their parents in the Lord, there's also the call for fathers to bring their children up in the way of the Lord, not provoking them to anger, not being unreasonable with them, not being harsh with them, but behaving in the right manner. There's that responsibility of the parents to bring the child up in the way of the Lord. That's important. Where things have not gone according to God's way, we see, as in any case, problems. So if you have suffered in some way at the hands of your parents that in an unright way, that is because your parents failed to honor God in bringing you up in the right way. You may, for some reason, blame yourself over that. Many people who have faced abuse of any kind, mistreatment, abandonment, or even apathy, blame themselves. And they look at themselves without recognizing the abuse that they actually faced. And so they allow that to excuse the reality. Some of that is an attitude of respect, and some of that is you can understand. Some of that you can understand where people are coming from. They want to acknowledge perhaps some failing in their own life or on their own part. But your actions or lack thereof do not excuse the sin or shame of another person's failure in any way. Your actions have no bearing on another person's actions. Their sin is not your responsibility. Their sin is not your fault. We are directed to honor our parents, and where perhaps parents have not honored us, perhaps there has been harshness and lack of understanding in upbringing, there needs to be a recognition that that is because the parent has stepped outside of God's plan. The parent has stepped outside of God's presented plan as to this is the right way to bring up your children. In the same way, parents can do their utmost to bring up their children well. They can show love and care and kindness and generosity, and they can give their children an excellent and good and godly upbringing, and the child walks away. And sometimes the child may walk away with all manner of false slander. Sometimes the child may walk away with many hateful words. Sometimes the child may walk away for no known reason other than that they resented being treated as a child while they were children. That's not the parent's fault. The parent is not responsible for the child's sin. The reality is that we are directed to honor parents. In this case, and the reason it's situated here in verse 12 is an indication to some extent that honor for others begins in the home. It is something that is seen and cultivated in a respectful environment in homes, in a respectful and loving and caring environment between father, mother, and child or children. Honor for all people begins in the home. If you cannot respect or if you cannot honor your own family, how can you honor anyone? That's the basic point here. It can be difficult to honor parents. We are directed to honor parents. We are directed to respect parents. And we need to understand that respect and that honor, even when it is difficult, even when it is tough, is rooted in an understanding of God's call for us to respect, to honor all men. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17 says specifically, honor all men. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Many people would have read that and perhaps felt shocked. Hold on, there's a lot of people I don't want to honor. There's a lot of people I have no respect for. I struggle. I often see on social media people say, I have no respect for him. I have no respect for those people. I have no respect for that person. And sometimes you can sympathize. You can sympathize with the spirit. You can sympathize with the upset. You can sympathize with the anger. There are cases when it is wrong to not be angry. We're told to be angry and not sin. So be angry, but don't sin. But anger, frustration, and resent of another person's inappropriate actions does not negate the importance of respect. We are to treat all men as people who have been shown God's grace and goodness and kindness. We're to treat all men with respect. We are not above anyone else. We do not have the moral high ground. Yes, in Jesus Christ we are saved by God's grace and we are made right and we are made righteous, but we are not to behave in a way that is holier than thou. We are not to behave in a way that is self-righteous. We are not to think in such a way that elevates ourselves past the point of another person's failure. Where we say, well, look at this person. I have no respect because of the way they talk or the way they've acted. No respect for that person at all. If you say that, consider your words. If you've said that, consider your feelings there. Perhaps you are not expressing yourself as you intend to. Perhaps you are. But the Scriptures say very clearly, God tells us very clearly to honor all men. Why? Because while some men may exchange the proper and appropriate relationship with other people for behavior that is brutal, that is wrong, that is animalistic in some cases, that is truly harmful and detrimental to society, that person was conceived in the same way you were conceived. That person had an infancy just as you had an infancy. They had a childhood just as you had a childhood. And you don't know all of the circumstances that they experienced in their childhood. You don't know perhaps how they were brought up. You don't know perhaps what led them to be in certain situations, what helped guide them in their own responsibility towards whatever action you have no respect for. But as a person made in God's image, however marred that image is, that person must be respected even while that person is opposed. Respect does not mean that you avoid disagreement. I can respect you and disagree with you. Respect does not mean that you do not oppose. I can respect you, and because I respect you, I will oppose you. Respect does not mean that you do not get angry with another person and in some way express that anger. Respect is when you are angry with another person and by God's grace you're able to control that anger and channel it and express it in the right and appropriate, honorable way. Just because someone else is breaking God's laws, just because someone else is harming others, does not mean that you dispense with God's law and in turn return like for like. God is the avenger. God is the one who executes justice on righteousness, and He's given governments to do that. And when we honor our parents in the home, when we respect our parents in the home, perhaps even right now when Those of us who are adults maybe, and who may have had difficult situations growing up, or who know of people who have had, when we recognize there can be respect and honor while disagreement and disappointment. When we recognize that, we will be able to show the appropriate respect and honor for our government. I do not like a lot of what our government has stood for, a lot of what our government has done. I don't like what many of the parties, perhaps all of them, there are elements all parties have done, elements all political groupings have participated in that I dislike, and I dislike very strongly. There are some things that have made me upset, some things have made me angry. And yet I am called to respect and show honor and to submit to the governing authority as one given by God. Romans 13 says that I ought to do that. Titus chapter 3 verse 1 through 2 says that I ought to do that. And that is how society functions healthily. That is how families function. And when families function right, communities will function right. When communities function right, cities will function right. When cities function right, nations will function right. We can't fix society and expect it to be good in any way. Society is broken, society is fallen, and it's probably going to get worse. However, that does not mean that we abandon seeking society's good and health. And that begins in the family. That begins with how we treat one another. Honor your parents. We display honor for God in honoring parents. The first thing is that it can be difficult to honor parents. Second, we are directed to honor parents. Third, we display honor for God in honoring parents. This isn't about your parents. This is about God. I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Because God has presented His law and because He's presented His right way in His word. And God having been first and put first in your life, you're going to, in your relationship with your fellow man, before you get to the stealing, the adultery, the killing and coveting and lying, abandoning all of that, you need to understand what it is to respect and honor your parents, even when it may be difficult. We worship and show love for God by showing love and respect to our families. But God always is first. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, Luke chapter 14, verse 26, you can read how Jesus says you cannot be His disciple if you are putting your parents first. If you're putting family in front of Christ, and following Him, if you are following their wishes or whims first, then you cannot follow Christ. If you're not willing to be forsaken or left by family, if you're not willing to walk away from things your family may be participating in, you cannot be a disciple of Jesus Christ. There's a story of a young man whose uncle is a well-known prosperity teacher, but he is even disliked by many prosperity teachers. He milks people for a great deal of money. He lives a very extravagant lifestyle, and he has claimed falsely on many occasions to have healed people, and many cases have been disproven, and many cases have been seen for the lies that they are. He's in constant trouble with the tax man, has regularly been involved in scandal, even adultery, and yet he still persists and is still given a lot of cash for his efforts. It's not ministry. His nephew grew up in this environment, and the whole family operated as sort of a business. It was like some sorts of spiritualistic firm of sorts, some family company of kind of spiritual gang lords, and they lived this high life, very extravagant. And eventually the nephew saw what the scriptures really taught. He heard the gospel, and he realized, I'm living a lie. I'm promoting a lie, and I'm not going to do it anymore. And so he left. And Costi Hen is his name. He's the nephew of Benny Hen. He has walked away from the lies of his uncle and has sought to expose them while following Jesus Christ. He still respects his uncle as a family member. He still loves his uncle as a family member, but he is refusing to continue to back a lie, and he's refusing to continue to live a lie. That's what discipleship looks like. It involves abandoning even those who are near and dear in a physical or in a ideological sense for the sake of following truth. If you're in that situation of being around people who are living lies or promoting lies or doing that which is wrong, and you hear the message of the gospel, it's not that you say, I'm severing my contact with you. It's that you follow Christ, and very often, as has happened with this young man, Costi, that contact is severed with you. You try to do the right thing, and people leave you. Who comes first? Who is to be honored first? Who's to be respected in every way to the point of obeying in every way? You're to obey your parents in the Lord. Meaning, if this pleases the Lord, where this pleases the Lord, obey your parents. But if this is wrong, if this is against the Lord, there is no obligation to allow a life that is a lie. Finally, while we display honor for God in honoring parents, we derive good from honoring God by honoring parents. We've not focused as much on the latter half of verse 12, but it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. We derive good from honoring God by honoring parents. The FBI leader back some time ago, J. Edgar Hoover, said that the child taught to honor the 10 Commandments will have little trouble in following the laws of the land. And that's true. In a sense, the child must be taught the law before the child respects the law. And if the child respects the law, perhaps the child will eventually come to recognize the life that's in Jesus Christ beyond the law. Some people say, well, we're not saved by the law, so why teach the law? That's just moralism. No, we teach the law because the law is good. God created the law. God gave the law. And not everyone is going to find the truth of the gospel. Not everyone is going to come to Jesus Christ. That doesn't change the reality that the best for a nation and the best for society is following the laws of the Lord. It's not about what is gaining salvation with God. It's also about what is honoring and good for society. This is what He has given as the bedrock for society. This nuclear family, father and mother and children. Love and respect shared, honor shared within the home that is in then turn shown to others in society that creates, when practiced in mass, a healthy society and a healthy culture. If you look at much of the rebellion in our society and its even anarchist lust, you're going to look at why our society is where it is today, and you can draw the lines straight back to the obliteration of the nuclear family. Broken homes. Problems in families. Apathetic parental upbringing. Children left to their own devices. Children not taught to respect. Children simply, in some cases, following the negative example of their parents. The reality is that where there is rebellion at home, there is always going to be rebellion in society. That rebellion that starts in the household is going to extend to daily life. And the only way we can combat that, the only way we can truly understand how that is the case is when we recognize that following Jesus Christ is the only way to ensure that we have a value for our fellow man. Upholding the one true God is the only way we can ensure that we are going to be in a right relationship with other people. When the Lord promises here long life, He's not, again, speaking just to individual people. He is speaking to the nation. These commands were given to the nation, that you may live as a nation long in the land your God has given you, where this truth of and importance of honoring your family, where the nuclear family is destroyed, the life of the nation is limited and it cannot survive. If you apply it in an individual sense, you might say, well, okay, Jesus, He obeyed His parents. He honored His parents. Jesus was the best. He was perfect. He was holy. He didn't live that long, did He? He lived a maximum of 33 years. Where was God's promise then? Or what about your teenage friend who died in tragic circumstances? What about your childhood friend who was always respectful to their parents, who honored their parents? What about that? Why was that allowed to happen? We do not understand why everything is allowed to happen as it does. But this promise is an assurance that if you honor your parents, you will live, some have said, well, you will do well as long as you live. Remember, this is a translation, and some things don't carry over as well in translations as in the original language they were written. But the concept is that as long as you have life, you will do well when you follow these principles, and you will be content. But ultimately, we aren't living for the here and now. Ultimately, we see society, in a healthy sense, being obliterated, and no one seems to be connecting the dots. I pray you connect the dots. And I pray that honor and respect is taught and is upheld in your life and in your homes and in your families. But know that when it is not present in society, we will not find health and longevity in health in this society. We are looking for something better, something that goes beyond this. We're looking to a day when we will be not only with our Father, our Mother on earth, we will be with our Father in heaven. And while our Father on earth may not have treated us well, or while we may have misgivings about our parents' teaching, or ability to relate to us at different points in our life, whatever your misgiving is, you have to recognize your parents are only human. Your parents were human. And so because they were human, they had failures. Some failures were much greater than others, but they were human. They are human, made in God's image. And for that, whatever the experience of negativity, you need to respect them. And part of that respect is no matter how great the pain, you need to pray for them. You need to pray for that person. You need to pray. And you need to strive to forgive. You need to strive, even if your parent is your enemy, to show love. As the Lord said, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. But recognize this, whatever your experience of family on this earth, you have a family here. You have a family in the church. You have a family whose Father is the Lord of heaven and earth. He is your Father in heaven. You can go to Him, and where you've experienced rejection and hurt and pain, you can find love, warmth, and acceptance built on your repentance and faith in Him. Where you've experienced abandonment, where you've experienced apathy, you find a relationship of interest, a personal relationship with the one who knows all things, who knows the end from the beginning. He knows you front and back. He knows your every need. So turn to Him. Run to Him. He's given you everything that's good. He is your Father. He's your friend. Honor Him.